September 17th, 1944. The sky above Holland filled with silk and fire. From horizon to horizon, thousands of paratroopers descended through roaring wind, their parachutes blooming like white flowers over a battlefield not yet theirs. Below, rivers coiled like steel traps, each bridge a gateway to Germany, each mistake a sentence of death. It was supposed to be the masterstroke, a single lightning strike to end the war by Christmas. But as anti-aircraft shells burst among the falling men, as gliders shattered in fields and rivers ran red beneath the bridges of Arnhem, one truth became painfully clear. The boldest plan of the war was about to meet the hardest land in Europe. This is Operation Market Garden, the day the Allies flew too high and fell into legend. By the autumn of 1944, victory seemed within reach. The Allies had broken out of Normandy, raced across France, and stood at the threshold of Germany. Every general could feel the war's momentum shifting. Hitler's armies were in retreat, his empire cracking from within. But speed came with hunger. The Allied supply lines stretched thin, trucks choking on mud and exhaustion, fuel tankers lagging behind the advance. Two commanders now faced a fateful choice: grind forward slowly or gamble everything on one decisive strike. That gambler was Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. His idea was breathtaking: drop tens of thousands of airborne troops deep behind enemy lines, seize a chain of bridges across the Netherlands, and open a road straight into the German Ruhr. Tanks from the British XXX Corps would punch north along a single narrow highway, linking up with the airborne units one by one. It was elegant in theory. In practice, it demanded perfection from chaos. 3 airborne divisions, the American 101st and 82nd, and the British 1st Airborne, would fall like lightning across 100 kilometers of occupied territory. The final and most distant objective: a slender steel bridge over the Rhine at a quiet Dutch town called Arnhem. The men called it a bridge too far. But on that September morning, they didn't yet know how right they were. The morning of September 17th broke bright and still, a rare gift in a northern autumn. From the English airfields came a thunder like rolling surf. Hundreds of C-47 Dakotas lined the runways, engines trembling under the weight of expectation. Paratroopers sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces blackened with grease, their helmets heavy with the knowledge that by nightfall many of them would be gone. In the distance, gliders waited like silent ghosts, wooden birds built to carry jeeps, artillery, and dreams of victory. They had no engines, no second chances. Once released, they would drift toward the Dutch countryside at the mercy of wind and flak. The operation's code name was Market Garden. Market for the airborne assault, Garden for the ground advance. Together, they would carve a corridor through the Netherlands straight to the heart of Germany. At the top of the chain stood Lieutenant General Frederick, boy, Browning, dashing, ambitious, the very image of the British officer class. He promised Montgomery that his men could take and hold Arnhem for 48 hours until relief arrived. It would take longer, but no one wanted to admit that now. Below him, the Americans were ready. The 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, would seize the bridges around Eindhoven. The 82nd would push for Nijmegen. And farther north, at the edge of the operation, the British 1st Airborne Division, the Red Devils, would capture Arnhem's bridge across the lower Rhine. Their commander, Major General Roy Urquhart, knew the odds. Intelligence reports spoke of scattered enemy units, remnants, nothing more. But rumors drifted in, whispers of SS Panzer divisions resting near Arnhem, rearming after Normandy. The warnings were brushed aside. The plan was too beautiful to doubt. So in the calm before takeoff, men wrote letters home. They adjusted their harnesses, checked their Sten guns, joked through the fear that gnawed at their guts. The chaplains walked down the rows offering quiet blessings, the kind that sound more like farewells. Then the signal came. Engines roared. Wheels left the ground. The armada rose into the sky, 2,000 aircraft and gliders stretching from one horizon to the other. Beneath them, England receded like a memory. Ahead lay the flat green fields of Holland, crisscrossed by rivers that glittered like knives. For a moment, it looked like glory. But even the most brilliant sunlight can't hide the shadow waiting beyond it. The armada reached Holland just after noon, a swarm of steel locusts blotting the sky. Below, the Dutch looked up in disbelief, waving and cheering as parachutes unfurled like petals over their towns and fields. To them, liberation had come at last. For the paratroopers, it was a storm of beauty and terror. As they dropped through the clear air, black puffs of flak burst around them, blooming flowers of death. Bullets cut through silk and flesh alike. Men twisted in their harnesses, falling sideways through smoke, their rifles spinning away. Some landed in open meadows under machine gun fire. Others crashed into canals and drowned, tangled in their own lines. Yet, by sheer will, order took shape from chaos. The Americans at Eindhoven and Nijmegen fought their way into towns, securing bridges under relentless fire. The Dutch resistance joined them, guiding patrols through winding streets, whispering warnings in cellars and barns. Farther north, the British 1st Airborne drifted down into a nightmare of fog and confusion. Gliders splintered against dikes and tree lines. Radios failed almost immediately. Units were scattered across miles of countryside, their commanders cut off from one another. Still, they pressed on toward Arnhem. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost led the 2nd Battalion in a desperate race through Dutch villages, his men running on adrenaline and courage. They reached the bridge by evening, a miracle of discipline amid madness. They dug in on its northern end, sandbagging windows, mounting machine guns, stringing grenades along stairwells. Then came the rumble. The sound of treads, heavy, rhythmic, inevitable. SS Panzer tanks, veterans of the Eastern Front, rolled out of the forests and into view. The scattered remnants intelligence had dismissed were in fact 2 elite armored divisions. Frost's men opened fire. The first German half-track exploded in a burst of flame, another crashed into the wreckage behind it, but the tanks kept coming. Their shells ripped through houses, flinging bricks and bodies into the air. The paratroopers fought from room to room, floor to floor, the bridge shaking beneath the bombardment. South of Arnhem, a special corps began its long crawl up the single narrow highway, the only road to reach the trapped paratroopers. It was 1 tank wide, hemmed in by canals and bogs. Every blown bridge, every German ambush turned the road into a graveyard of steel. From his position at the bridge, Frost radioed for help, static, fragments, then silence. Night fell. The Rhine reflected the fires of Arnhem like a mirror of damnation. And as the panzers encircled the bridge, the men inside the ruins understood the cruel truth. No one was coming. They were the spearhead of a plan already breaking apart. By the 2nd day, Arnhem had become a furnace. Smoke lay thick over the Rhine, the air reeking of cordite, blood, and burning wood. Frost's men, barely a few hundred by now, held the northern end of the bridge like ghosts in a broken cathedral. Windows were shattered, walls gutted, the streets strewn with the wreckage of men and machines. Every building had become a fortress, every room a last stand. German armor surrounded them, shelling the ruins from every angle. The paratroopers fought back with whatever they had left, rifles, PIAT launchers, grenades tossed through collapsing doorways. The wounded refused evacuation. They simply reloaded and fired from their stretchers. On the 3rd day, a shell tore through Frost's command post. He was wounded, deafened, his men reduced to fewer than 100. They had run out of food, nearly out of ammunition, but not out of resolve. When the Germans finally breached the perimeter, they were met by defiant bursts of gunfire and the stubborn roar of soldiers who refused to surrender until every bullet was spent. Meanwhile, south of Arnhem, the ground advance had turned into purgatory. The Irish Guards led the column along Hell's Highway, where every bend hid an ambush. Bridges were blown just before they arrived. Engineers rebuilt them under fire. Supply trucks burned along the roadside. Every hour lost meant another paratrooper dying in the north. At last, after days of brutal fighting, XXX Corps reached the outskirts of Nijmegen, but the Rhine still stood between them and Frost. American paratroopers of the 82nd crossed it in canvas boats, rowing through machine gun fire under the red flare of tracers. They seized the Nijmegen Bridge in one of the most heroic charges of the war, but it was too late. By the time British armor finally pushed north, Arnhem was gone. Frost and his surviving men had been captured. Of the 10,000 paratroopers dropped near Arnhem, barely 2,000 would escape. The rest were killed or taken prisoner. When the news reached Montgomery's headquarters, the room fell silent. Operation Market Garden, the great leap to end the war, had fallen short by a single bridge. The dream of a swift victory lay smoldering beside the Rhine, drowned beneath the sound of retreating boots. The wreckage of Market Garden stretched across Holland like a scar. Fields once green were now blackened and cratered. Villages that had welcomed the paratroopers with flowers lay in ruins. The bridges, those slender arteries of the plan, were either shattered or guarded by the enemy. The Rhine still flowed, calm and indifferent, between the Allies and Germany. In London and Washington, the mood soured. What was meant to be a masterstroke became a lesson in the cost of ambition. Montgomery defended his plan, calling it 90% successful. But the 90% that lived on maps could not erase the 10% that died in the mud. The paratroopers who returned from Arnhem carried the 1,000-yard stare of men who had seen courage meet futility. For the Dutch civilians, liberation had turned into occupation once more. The northern Netherlands suffered a brutal winter of starvation, the Hunger Winter, as German forces retaliated and supplies dwindled. Families who had cheered from their rooftops now hid in cellars, living on tulip bulbs and melted snow. Yet amidst the ashes, Market Garden left more than failure. It revealed the limits of power, the danger of speed, and the endurance of the human spirit when trapped between duty and disaster. The Allied armies regrouped, slower but wiser, and when they finally crossed the Rhine months later, they did it with grim caution, remembering the ghosts of Arnhem. The men of the 1st Airborne were never shamed. Even the Germans who fought them spoke with respect. SS officers called them the Lions by the Bridge. For 9 days, they had held out against overwhelming odds, their stand buying precious time and proving that valor does not always need victory to be immortal. In the quiet aftermath, when the guns had ceased and the dead were counted, the map of Europe had not changed. But something deeper had shifted, the Allies' illusion of inevitability. War, they were reminded, was still a thing of chaos, where even the best-laid plans could fall apart in a single heartbeat. Operation Market Garden stands as one of history's grandest contradictions, a plan born of brilliance and blinded by belief. It showed that courage alone cannot outpace reality, that even the noblest ambitions can unravel when pride flies faster than reason. To the men who fought it, there was no glory in failure, only the raw endurance of brotherhood. The survivors of Arnhem carried those memories for decades. The bridge lit by fire, the smell of cordite and river water, the faces of friends who never came back. They spoke of the battle not with bitterness, but with a quiet, haunted pride. They had been asked to do the impossible, and for a time they did. In hindsight, Market Garden is not merely a story of defeat. It's a portrait of human will stretched to its limit, of soldiers, commanders, and civilians who each confronted the cruel mathematics of war. The bridges still stand today, rebuilt in peace, their steel reflecting the same sky that once rained down parachutes and dreams. And beneath that sky, the lesson endures. That victory in war is never just about plans or power. It's about the fragile line between vision and vanity and the courage to walk it anyway. The men at Arnhem walked that line. They fell short of their bridge, but not of history.